You know, one of the things that you mentioned, Father, that I think a lot of people really need to understand, when Catholics, venerate relics, you mentioned the scriptural aspect of that and the healing that's associated with that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Scripture has many references to relics. We hear about, for example, in the second book of Kings, a man had died and he was being buried in the grave in which the prophet Elisha was already buried. And this was a common Jewish practice, that when a person of holiness had died and was buried, it was desired to be buried next to that holy person. And so the Jews, what they would do is they would have open chambers in the ground, and the dead would be laid on shelves, if you will. So it was an in-ground mausoleum, if you will. And one time, as they were burying a dead man, we're told, in 2 Kings, a band of Moabites was seen coming. Now, the Moabites were brutal people. They were cannibals, among other things. And so when they were around, you didn't want to be around. And so it states that they dropped the dead man's body and went off and hid. But when the man's body came into contact with the bones of the prophet Elisha, which they did so inadvertently, it states he came back to life and rose to his feet. By the time we get to the New Testament, we're told people would touch the hem of Christ's garment, and Mark informs us that as many touched it, they were healed. Now, it's significant because Christ wasn't being touched, but merely his clothing, and that was sufficient for a miracle. We have in the book of Acts, for example, people used to line the streets with the sick so that when Peter walked by, at least his shadow would fall on one or another of them. So what that is informing us is that even Peter's shadow was healing. Also in Acts, we're told people would take their handkerchiefs and aprons, in other words, scraps of cloth, and they would place them on Paul, and then they would place those same cloths on the sick, and it states that their diseases would leave them, and if they had any evil spirits, that they would depart. So, what do we do when we venerate a relic? Well, we're certainly not worshiping the relic, and we're not worshiping the saint of whom the relic is a relic. What we're doing is it's ultimately an act of devotion towards God, because that's the final object of our religious faith. Nevertheless, we are honoring those things, those instruments that God uses. And I mean, we do that even in our everyday life. George Washington was a great man. He's the father of the nation. In the Smithsonian, they have there a metal chest that he used in the field of battle, that he used to sit on and keep his personal belongings in. Well, we treasure that. We honor that as a people. We're not worshiping that, and we know that our final object of that respect we give to that object is to George Washington. Nevertheless, we treasure those objects that belong to him.